The sun hit the tin roof in long, shimmering streaks that made the porch too hot to stand on barefoot by midday. I stood at the edge of the path just past where the gravel turned into moss and memory, and there it was, the flash of red, stapled like a warning flag to the gate. The wind nudged it, flapping once, then again. "Non-compliant structure!" It screamed in black block letters. 10 days, the notice said. 10 days to erase something that had stood for 35 years. The ramp itself was nothing special. Planks of cedar, bleached soft gray by decades of sun and storm, anchored by stones. Wendell and I hauled one summer when our backs were still good. But this gate, this letter I hadn't expected war to start with a staple gun. I pulled the paper off, careful not to tear it. The ink was official too crisp. Section 3.4 HOA. Code, it said, as if it were quoting scripture. I turned toward the mailbox with a sour taste already forming. Wren, my old mutt, lifted her head from the porch just enough to thump her tail once. Even she could sense a shift in the air. Inside the mailbox sat a matching envelope, white stiff and embossed with the HOA's seal. Glenna Tisdale's name glared back at me like a traffic citation. HOA Vice President. Her handwriting hadn't softened since the last bake sale she tried to shut down. I peeled it open slowly, standing right there under the drape of pine shadow. Same message, same tone. Remove unpermitted structure. Failure to comply will result in fines and board action. Board action. Back inside, I dropped the letter on the counter, poured myself half a glass of sweet tea left in the fridge, and leaned against the sink. The window above looked straight out to the lake, still and wide, with the sun laying itself down across the water like a gold-plated promise. I couldn't even remember a time when the ramp wasn't there. Wendell and I had laid the footings before. His heart ever gave him trouble, before the HOA had even been conceived in those glossy new developments up north of the Bend. That was the summer of '86. I still had calluses to prove it, though time had mostly turned them soft. After supper, I wandered to the shed behind the cabin. Wren followed, sniffing at ghosts. The top drawer of Wendell's old desk stuck like always. I had to bump it with my hip to get it to slide. Inside, buried under old tackle catalogs and a few rusted keys, was a green binder with its spine cracked open like a bad memory. I carried it inside, setting it on the table under the yellow lamplight. Dust drifted like old thoughts. I flipped through pages, some receipts, water quality notes, and then a folded topo map with the corners nearly transparent. I opened it gently. There it was, a pencil line, faint but unmistakable, arcing from the old well marker down to where the shoreline broke. Access path, private, grandfathered, 1986. Written in Wendell's blocky hand. My throat tightened. The ink had faded to near nothing, but the intent was still loud. On the back of the gatepost, the one that leaned a little east, always had I found something else. Faded ink, barely legible now, W. Ray, 1993. He must have signed it back when we replaced the planks. That name, that year, were part of the bones of this place. Glenna's letter hadn't just questioned the legality of the ramp. It questioned our memory, our presence, our right to remain part of this lake. I sat back on the porch, Wren curled at my feet, map in hand like a forgotten flag. The night came in slow. Crickets started up, and somewhere across the lake I saw a porch light blink on. Dee's place. If anyone remembered what Wendell had filed, it'd be her. She'd kept more of him than anyone else, even me. Tomorrow I'd ask Dee McKinney. Glenna stood like a preacher on a pulpit, clipboard held high, her words clipping the summer air like shears through overgrown hedges. The HOA lawn behind the community center had always smelled faintly of citronella and freshly printed rules. Tonight it smelled of something sharper. Judgment, maybe. She faced a semicircle of folding chairs, Mrs. Lois perched like a robin on her seat, Mr. Reller hunched and blinking beneath his veteran's cap. A few others had come for the promise of lemonade and the spectacle, and Glenna delivered. Section 3.4 she intoned. Tapping the underlined clause prohibits any dock or ramp structure extending beyond 3 feet into shared waters unless approved in writing by the Design Review Committee. Her voice had the tone of someone who had laminated her sense of power. Even the flies buzzing in the heat seemed to pause for her punctuation. I stood a few steps away, hands in my jacket, fingers brushing the edge of the folded topo map tucked deep in the inner pocket. My mouth was dry, but I raised my hand. That ramp, I said steady but not loud, was built in 1986. It predates the HOA charter. It predates your committee. She smiled, not warmly. Sir, lakes are communal. Nothing is truly private anymore. That got a few polite nods. But from the back a thin voice mumbled, "That dock's been there since my boy could crawl." It was Mr. Reller. His voice trailed off like he realized too late that it wasn't part of the script. Glenna ignored it. Her eyes stayed fixed on me. "I understand your sentiment," she said the way people say, "bless your heart," when they mean the opposite. But we cannot make exceptions based on nostalgia. The rules are clear. The clipboard in her hands was underlined in red, its margins annotated like a sermon. Every clause she read felt like a needle stitched against time, unraveling the small patch of peace Wendell and I had stitched decades ago. "You have 7 days," she said, shifting her weight like she was delivering a verdict. "After that, the HOA may proceed with removal. Legal action may follow." Her clipboard snapped shut with a finality I'd only heard once before when they closed Wendell's casket lid. The chairs creaked as people shifted, unsure whether to clap or leave. Dee stood across the walkway, arms folded. She didn't speak. Her eyes met mine and held steady, unreadable. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have given Glenna exactly what she wanted: spectacle. I turned and walked slowly back across the lawn. The map in my jacket crinkled slightly under my palm. The sun had dropped low, casting long shadows like drawn-out threats. Wren wasn't with me this time. She hated crowds, but I felt her absence in my steps. My cabin waited beyond the bend, quiet as always. I wanted to reach it before the weight of the evening sank in. As I reached the edge of the mowed grass, I heard Mrs. Lois ask softly, "Why now?" After all these years, no one answered. Some things were worth holding tighter when others tried to erase them. Dee opened her screen door before I even lifted my hand to knock. "I figured you'd be coming," she said, a tea towel draped over one shoulder, the scent of lemon oil trailing behind her. Her house smelled like memory wood polish, old books, and summer dust. The kind of place where the air didn't rush, just shifted gently like it remembered too much to be in a hurry. I followed her in brushing my boots on the welcome mat that read, "Not all who wander are lost," though the L had started to peel. The living room hadn't changed in decades. Same beige recliner with the crochet cover, same lamp with the shade a little crooked. On the top shelf above the console radio sat a photo I hadn't seen in years. Wendell and Dee arms. Muddy, grinning. Standing barefoot on the dock. It must have been taken the day we finished laying the planks. He was still wearing that ragged UT cap he never admitted he loved. I pulled the folded topo map from my jacket and handed it to her. Her brow furrowed. "He kept the original in the drawer behind the den," she said, slowly tracing the pencil line with one finger. "But this looks like the one he gave you." "He did," I said. "But Glenna's pulled a fast one. I need to know if Wendell ever put it down in legal ink." She set the map on her lap and stood walking toward the hallway with a kind of purposeful grace I remembered from her choir days. A minute later, she returned with a small wooden lockbox. Its brass latch clicked as she turned the key. Inside were the things people save when they've loved quietly and thoroughly: a pressed leaf, a motel keychain, a dance ticket, a packet of letters tied with kitchen string, and tucked beneath them all, a sealed envelope, yellowing around the edges. "He wrote this for you," she said. "Told me to hang on to it." My name was on the front in Wendell's distinct blocky script. In case of dispute, it read. Underneath the envelope lay something heavier, a folded, legal-sized document. Dee handed it to me without a word. I unfolded it with care. The parchment was thick, but time had made it fragile. The ink had faded to that smoky brown that once was black, but the words were clear. Transfer of shoreline rights. Cypress South, 1986. To Merton Claiborne, signed Wendell Ray. Notary, Rufus J. Bleecker County. Clerk, Long Hollow Township. D watched me read, eyes soft but unwavering. He brought that down to the courthouse himself, she said. Rufus was still working mornings. They had coffee after. Did Rufus keep a copy? Sure did. Wendell made him promise. You'll want to talk to him. He's still got the sharpest memory in the county. Doesn't forget a single stamp. The map rested in my lap. The deed sat atop it now, heavier in meaning than in weight. I looked at the sealed envelope again. I didn't open this, I said. Dee shook her head gently. It wasn't time. Wendell thought. He thought you'd know when. Silence filled the space between us like a quilt. Outside, the fan hummed from the porch, stirring heat more than breaking it. Thanks, Dee. Of course, she said. It was always his intention you'd be the one to stand when the time came. I folded the deed, tucked it with the map, and slipped them both into my jacket. Tomorrow, I'd look up Rufus Bleecker. Rufus's trailer sat just outside town limits across from a shuttered gas station and a row of pine trees that hadn't changed since Reagan was in office. I parked beside his rusted Dodge and stepped out into the thick morning air. A screen door banged once, and there he was, tallish, wiry, wearing suspenders over a short-sleeved dress shirt. Still, know my own filing system, he said, grinning, and pushed open the door. The place smelled like paper and pipe smoke, even though neither had been lit in years. Rolled-up maps leaned against the walls like forgotten blueprints of small-town dreams. Ledgers lined the bookshelves in haphazard order. Smokey, a beagle with cloudy eyes, lifted his head from a floor mat, snorted, and went back to sleep. Rufus motioned me toward a dusty cabinet labeled CS. This one's got your name, he said, pulling open the drawer. His fingers moved with more certainty than speed. Still, remember that shoreline sketch Wendell filed? Above the cabinet hung a black-and-white photo, Rufus and Wendell younger, wearing county clerk jackets, both with hair and wider grins. Wendell's arm was slung over Rufus's shoulder like brothers. Inside the drawer, nestled between tax plat maps and septic tank permits, was a file stamped Cypress, South Shoreline, 1986. Rufus pulled it out and set it on the desk like it was a sacred relic. He unfolded the map first. The contours were hand-colored green for tree line, blue for water depth. A bold, graphite note stretched along the dock line. Installed 6/14/1986, under permit number CL421. That's my handwriting, Rufus said. HOA didn't exist yet. Back then we cared about fish counts and bridge loads, not lawn gnomes and mailbox paint. I smiled, but my chest felt tight. This is perfect, I said. But Glenna, she won't accept this without backup. Rufus nodded. Then maybe it's time we opened this. He reached under the desk and pulled out a smaller envelope. My name was on it, but the handwriting wasn't Wendell's. It was Rufus's. He gave this to me about a year before he passed, Rufus said. Told me open it only if the HOA ever got grabby. Looks like they have. He slid it open with a brass letter opener shaped like a trout, clearly a gift from a different era. Inside was a second map overlaid with red ink notations, dates, and dock measurements. Wendell had logged each update. Planks replaced in '94, anchor posts redrilled in '03, repainting in '11. Every improvement had a date, a note, and in 2 cases attached photos paper-clipped to the margin. One showed me and Wendell mid-labor, drenched in sweat and smiling like fools beside a stack of lumber. There was also a letter, 2 pages typed, signed in Wendell's shaky end-of-life scrawl. It read more like a will than a warning. This ramp it began was built with sweat equity and community purpose. If anyone tries to remove it under pretense, know that it was never private indulgence, it was shared right. To those who try to rewrite shoreline memory with bylaws, I say look deeper. The lake remembers. I didn't realize my hands were trembling until I set the pages down. Rufus folded the papers with care, placed them back in the folder, and handed it to me. This'll do, he said. You bring me to that meeting and I'll bring them the law. Glenna stood at the front of the repurposed church hall like she owned it. Her blazer was navy and sharp at the shoulders, her glasses perched with surgical precision. The PowerPoint clicker looked like a remote detonator in her hand. "We have convened this emergency session," she began to address a structural non-compliance that threatens not only property values but the very integrity of our community. Her voice bounced off the warped linoleum floor and hummed beneath the flickering ceiling fans. The screen behind her showed a photo of my dock enlarged to the point of distortion like a mugshot of sun-bleached wood and iron hinges. In the third row, Dee passed me a folded note. I opened it with one hand. In her neat script, let truth speak quietly but unmistakably. Glenna clicked again. Slide 2, a zoom on the ramp gate, the red HOA tag prominent. Slide 3, Article 3.4 of the HOA handbook circled twice. Slide 4, bolded text. Motion for forced removal. She scanned the room. "The HOA cannot allow rogue structures to go unchallenged," she said. "This dock presents a direct violation of Article 3.4. I propose we enforce removal within 72 hours. A few murmurs stirred. Mrs. Lois blinked nervously. Mr. Reller adjusted his glasses. The two younger newcomers scribbled notes. The air was thick with quiet judgment. "The floor is open," Glenna announced. I stood. Slow. Calm. "I'd like to present the record," I said. I walked to the front table and laid down 3 items. The 1986 notarized deed, crisp and sealed. The county-endorsed map, color-coded with shoreline annotations. Wendell's signed letter folded once with deliberate care. From the second row, Rufus stepped forward, his file satchel tucked under one arm. His suspenders looked newer than the rest of him. He walked with quiet certainty. He unfolded the map with reverence, laying it flat across the table. "Permit number CL 421, he said, pointing to the corner. "Filed June 14, 1986. This," he added his voice, "clear predates your HOA by 11 years. Murmurs swelled. Someone whispered, 11. A chair creaked. Even Smokey the Beagle at Rufus's feet stirred. Glenna stiffened. That map could be fabricated. Rufus didn't blink. "Stamped and logged by me. I was county clerk in 86. My file cabinet still holds the original carbon duplicate." He tapped the notary seal. "Official then, official now." She reached for the clicker but didn't press. Dee stood slowly, hands clasped in front. For years, this HOA has silenced the people who remember this lake before rules replaced neighbors. Some of us kept the letters. Some of us knew this moment would come. She opened her own folder and placed 3 folded notes beside the map. Wendell's handwriting loopy deliberate on each. "These are the letters he wrote to others. I wasn't the only one." Rufus turned to the group. "This isn't about nostalgia," he said. "It's about legal precedent, about fairness, and about not letting small authority grow into big power just because people stop looking at the paper trail." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "You want law? This is the law." Silence. Glenna's lips pressed into a thin line. Her slide behind her read community integrity. Now it looked more like irony. She gathered her paper's clicker quiet in her hand. No motion was made, no vote was called. As I stepped into the humid dusk, Dee joined me at the walkway. "It's not done," she said, "but it's started." Glenna's fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen, then again. No bars. The cinder block walls of the township hall weren't built for signal, just heat retention and the occasional echo. Behind her, the overhead fan shuddered once and stopped. The silence that followed felt thicker than the Tennessee dusk pressing outside. Mr. Pierce, seated at the end of the folding table, scribbled something on his yellow legal pad, nodding to himself. I couldn't see the words, but the grip he held on the pen said enough. Dee sat across the aisle, motionless, lips drawn tight. Her glance met mine for half a beat, and that was all I needed. Rufus stood smoothing out Wendell's letter with the deliberate grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime filing truth into quiet drawers. "I'd like to read this," he said. "No fanfare, no dramatics, just fact." He held the letter up gently like scripture and began. "This dock was constructed with full knowledge and consent of county authorities issued under Permit CL 421 on June 14, 1986. A pause, just enough for the date to sink in. Then he continued. Its purpose was twofold: provide access to the lake for my disabled brother-in-law and create a shared point of gathering for this side of Cyprus. The first picnic was held July 4th, 1986. 26 attendees. Hot dogs and potato salad, courtesy of Mrs. Fenley. I heard a sniffle. Maybe Mrs. Fenley's niece. Rufus kept reading. Over time, people forget how things start. But I hope you remember this: a community is not made by rules, but by use and memory. If one day this structure is called illegal, let this record show it was born legal and lived loved. He folded the page with care and stepped back. You could feel the weight shift in the room. Then Dee rose. She didn't speak right away. Just laid down a few papers on the center table, photocopies grainy, each stamped with a firm "Denied. GT." These, she said calmly, are grant proposals, requests for small things: a floating barrel for swimmers, a new bench by the East Trail, erosion mesh along the Kids' Cove. Her fingers tapped one page in particular. All denied. Glenna's signature here. Same hand every time. She didn't look at Glenna. She didn't need to. Then it was my turn. I placed one page an itemized HOA expense sheet on top of the stack. My finger underlined a bold line: security equipment. Zone B dock perimeter. $3,800. That zone, I said, is the patch of water surrounding my dock. Cameras installed in 2020, facing one direction. Glenna opened her mouth, but no words came out. Rufus stepped forward again. Let me translate a ramp that predates the HOA was surveyed, recorded, and then, without board consensus, targeted for surveillance using funds allocated for shoreline maintenance. Mr. Reller shifted in his seat. Mrs. Lois pressed her glasses higher on her nose but avoided Glenna's gaze. A fly buzzed near the flickering ceiling light. No one moved to swat it. Mr. Pierce stood slowly. He cleared his throat and read from his pad. I call for a board motion to suspend Vice President Glenna Tisdale from all HOA duties pending legal counsel review and audit of discretionary spending from 2019 to present. A silence. Then Mr. Beck raised his hand, followed by Dee. Then Mrs. Fenley. Then 3 more. 9 in favor, Mr. Pierce said. 3 opposed. It was done. Glenna didn't speak, didn't shout. She just stared at the documents on the table as if they'd grown teeth. She reached for nothing, not her binder, not her highlighter, not her phone. She walked past the chairs, past the exit sign, past Smokey's slow tail wag, and into the night. The pink highlighter stayed behind. I watched its neon body catch the dim light like the last echo of a rule rewritten. A week had passed since Glenna walked out, and the ramp, still standing, still solid, had been painted fresh. A clean coat of white, the kind that catches sunrise just right, and nailed gently to one of its posts a new sign: Legacy Dock. The letters hand-carved into a smooth plank. The lake was livelier that day than I'd seen it in years. Not noisy, just full of life. Families spread quilts across the grass. Kids with wet feet chased dragonflies. Someone had brought a speaker playing old fiddle tunes low enough to blend with the wind off the water. At the dock's edge, a boy tossed flat stones into the lake one by one. Why couldn't we use this before he asked his father? His dad knelt beside him, looking toward me. Because sometimes rules take a while to catch up to reason. Dee waved from behind a folding table where she was arranging sliced watermelon and those store-bought cookies with the neon frosting. Rufus, as ever, leaned against a tree in the shade, smiling without needing to say much. I stepped up to the portable mic stand we'd borrowed from the Methodist church and tapped once. It squealed, then quieted. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I want to announce something small but sturdy like the dock itself." From my shirt pocket I pulled a folded certificate and held it up. "This document establishes the Cypress Legacy Trust, a private recreational easement recorded with the county, open to all residents and not under HOA jurisdiction." A quiet cheer rose from the crowd. Some clapped. Rufus nodded. A few of Glenna's former allies, Mr. Beck among them, stood at the edge, hands in pockets, unsure if they were part of this or just watching it. Dee stepped up next. "We've already received our first grant," she said, holding a check stub. "It'll go toward 2 paddle boats for community use, especially for the kids." More applause, some of it from folks I didn't expect. Later, I saw Mrs. Lois chatting with Dee. Even Mr. Reller helped hang bunting on the fence line. There were no speeches after that. Just deviled eggs, lemonade, and the kind of idle chatter that used to fill this lakeside long before Section 3.4 ever existed. After the gathering wound down, I returned to my porch. Wren curled up at my feet, the lake glinting silver under the early evening sun. In the mailbox sat a single envelope. No stamp, just my name written in tight cursive. Inside, one sheet of paper, no letterhead. I misunderstood the meaning of stewardship. GT. No dramatics, no plea, just 7 words and an initial. I didn't feel triumphant, only still. Later that evening, I walked back down to the dock. At the community bulletin board, where faded notices flapped beside lawn care flyers and lost dog photos, I pinned the letter. Above it, I wrote in Sharpie history corrected. And beneath that, the new brass plaque on the dock read, "Dedicated to W. Ray for knowing when not to speak." And I stood there, not speaking. It was late October when I finally got around to sorting Wendell's old trunk. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in a decade, and maybe they hadn't. Pine smoke drifted in from the open window, the kind that lingers in your sweater for days. Outside, the lake mirrored the sky so perfectly you could have mistaken clouds for catfish. At the bottom of the trunk, under a flannel shirt, folded once then forgotten, I found another envelope. This one, sealed tight, the edges slightly curled from time but untouched. On the front, in Wendell's hand, "For when you understand." His handwriting was smoother than on the first letter, calmer, like it had been written before things got complicated. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and stared at it a while. Wren looked up from her mat, blinked once, then settled again. The letter was short, barely 2 paragraphs. "If you're reading this, it means you did it your way." Good. I never wanted a title. They offered me one back when the HOA was forming. I turned it down when they said our dock muddied the uniform shoreline vision. You know I don't like suits who talk like that. I stayed quiet because I didn't want power, but I hoped you'd speak when it mattered. If there's still a lake and still neighbors, maybe there's still hope. Yours in silence, W. The words didn't hit like a punch, more like a hand on your shoulder when you didn't know you needed one. That evening, Dee brought over chili in an old ceramic crock-pot. She didn't say much, just left it on the porch with a note. "This cold calls for stew and stories." The next morning, I framed Wendell's letter and posted it in the new bulletin frame on the dock, right next to the Legacy Trust schedule of community events. Paddleboat races, Tuesday porch concerts, dockside reading club, birding walks with Rufus. Later that week, I got an email from the town council, Mr. Claiborne. "Given your leadership with Cypress Legacy, would you consider serving as liaison for the Independent Lake Communities Advisory Board?" I didn't reply right away. That afternoon, I walked to the dock. A father was helping his daughter step onto the ramp. She couldn't have been more than 6. One pink sandal knocked against the new brass plaque. She paused. "Daddy, what's this say?" He read it aloud. "Dock dedicated to W. Ray for knowing when not to speak." She looked back at the lake, then nodded solemnly. I smiled faintly and whispered, "You were right to trust silence, old friend." The lake was quiet again this morning, just the soft slosh of water under the dock and a bird calling from the far reeds. The brass plaque caught a bit of light, not gleaming, just resting easy in its place. I ran my fingers across Wendell's carved words and smiled, not out of victory, but out of peace. Sometimes we protect things not with fences, but with memory. And every so often the rules that bound us break just enough to let something better in. Silence, when chosen, can echo louder than protest. Ever had a moment where standing still spoke louder than stepping up? If this story brought something back for you, I'd be honored to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments or share your own shoreline tale. She taped a red violation tag on my dock gate on the morning I was repainting it in memory of my late brother. Name's Merton Claiborne, retired engineer, lived on this shoreline since '84. The map she never bothered to flip, creased graphite streaked, tucked in my jacket pocket, had one note circled in blue, private grandfathered. Ever had someone pull rank in the wrong place on the wrong person?